The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered as I stood frozen in the sterile corridor. Each second stretching like an eternity. Dr. Carter's voice cut through the silence. His words sharp, as though the weight of them could crush me. Clara, your mother's condition is critical. We need to operate immediately. I couldn't breathe. My heart thundered in my chest. And the world seemed to tilt beneath me. My mind raced, but my body refused to move. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed Victor's number for the 6th time. My finger hovered over the screen, waiting, praying for him to answer. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. It was as if the universe was conspiring against me, pushing me further into despair with every unanswered call. The tightness in my chest grew unbearable. I had to reach him. I needed him here, not for me, but for her, for my mother. Finally, the call connected, but there was no relief, no comfort, just his cold, detached voice on the other end. What now, Clara? I'm in the middle of something important. His words struck like a slap. I could barely keep the tears at bay as I forced my voice to remain steady. Victor, Mom's being rushed into surgery. I need you here, now. The silence on the other end was deafening, and I braced myself for the rejection I knew was coming. And then it came, in the form of his dismissive, indifferent reply. Sorry, can't make it. Big things happening. Handle it yourself. The line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear. As the world around me spun out of control, my chest tightened, the ache in my heart spreading like wildfire. It wasn't just the coldness of his response. It was the realization, the gut-wrenching truth, that this was it. This was the moment I had been dreading. The man I had married, the man I had trusted, had turned into someone I no longer recognized. My eyes darted to the nurses wheeling my mother toward the ICU. My mind flashed back to a time when everything had felt different. When we were a family. I remembered the long summer afternoons at our family's grand estate, the scent of my mother's roses drifting through the open windows. The sound of my father's laughter echoing through the hallways. It all felt so far away now. As I watched my mother, fragile and unconscious, disappearing into the operating room, I understood something that I had refused to admit for so long. Victor was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, and the man I had shared my life with was no longer the person I thought I knew. And that, right there, was the moment I realized my marriage was over. As the nurses wheeled my mother down the hall, I stood motionless, my thoughts racing. My heart ached as I stared at the door to the ICU. My mind far from the sterile white walls around me. It was as if I could still hear the laughter of my father echoing in the grand hallways of our old house. That sound so warm, so full of life. That house, our family estate, had once been everything to us. The scent of my mother's roses filled every room. And those wide, ancient windows framed the sprawling garden where we spent countless afternoons. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a living, breathing part of our family, steeped in memories of generations before us. It was where I had grown up, where I had felt safe, where every creaking floorboard told the story of a family that had stood the test of time. I closed my eyes for a moment, and there she was, my mother, sitting in her favorite armchair, her delicate hands gently tending to the flowers in the garden. I could almost hear her voice, soft but firm, as she had told me time and time again, family isn't just about blood. Clara, it's about trust. It's about protecting what matters most. We were a family of fighters. My father had passed 3 years ago, leaving my mother and me to navigate the future alone. But we had the house, our home, our legacy, and when the time came, my mother and I would share it, preserve it, and make sure that nothing could tear it away from us. But now, as I stood in the sterile hospital corridor, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I had married, the man I had trusted with everything I had no place in this. He had never understood. He had never shared the same love for the house, the same reverence for our family's history. I had married a man who had promised to protect our future. But instead, he had been plotting his escape, planning to sell everything that mattered to us. It was in that moment, standing there in the hospital, with my mother's fate hanging in the balance, that I realized my marriage had been nothing more than a lie. And I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the realization that I had spent years holding onto something that was already broken. But something inside me shifted. I had been blind for so long, letting Victor's indifference shape my world. But now I saw clearly. And the more I thought about the years we had wasted, the more I felt a surge of anger rise within me. I would protect this estate, my mother's legacy, even if it meant doing it alone. Before I share what happened next, the moment that shattered everything and changed the course of my life forever, I want to take a moment to connect with you. My amazing viewers, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The weight of the day felt like it would crush me as I sat in the ICU waiting room. My mind racing. Every second that passed felt heavier than the last. And I could barely focus on the quiet hum of machines around me. My mother was in surgery. And I was completely alone, physically, emotionally, and mentally. I pulled my phone from my bag again, my fingers hesitating before dialing Victor's number. I knew he wouldn't answer. But the need to hear his voice, even if it was only to feel the sting of his indifference, was overwhelming. I needed him to acknowledge what was happening. I needed him to care. When the call went through, it was the same cold response. His voice had lost all warmth, all compassion. "Clara, what now?" Victor's tone was curt, as if speaking to an inconvenience. "I'm busy. Can this wait?" I felt my stomach drop. The man I had shared my life with, the man I had trusted with everything, had turned into someone I couldn't recognize. My mother was fighting for her life in that very moment. And Victor couldn't even be bothered to hide his impatience. "Victor, please. She's in surgery. I need you here," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the cracks threatening to break through. But he was unmoved. "I'm sorry, Clara, not now. I've got more important things to deal with," he replied flatly. "Handle it yourself." The line clicked dead in my ear, and I sank into the cold hospital chair, the weight of his words crushing me. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the realization. For months, I had felt the subtle shift in him. But hearing those words, so callous, so detached, was the moment I finally understood the depth of his betrayal. I needed answers. I needed to know how far this had gone, how deep the lies ran. My fingers, almost on autopilot, opened the email app on my phone. That's when I saw it. The message from Victor, dated only a few days ago, with the subject line, "Sale Agreement." I clicked it open. My eyes scanned the email quickly, the contents sending a chill through me. It was a sale agreement for the estate. The house, our home, my mother's legacy, was being sold. And there, buried in the details, was the name of the buyer. A buyer I had never heard of. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The estate was gone. The house that had been in my family for generations, the place where my father had spent his final years, was being sold without my knowledge, without my consent. But it didn't end there. I sifted through more documents in Victor's inbox, each one more damning than the last. Receipts for expensive purchases, luxury condos in Rio, private flights to Brazil, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of everything I had once believed in. I felt my blood run cold as I realized the truth. Victor wasn't just planning to sell the house. He was planning to leave me. The betrayal had been building slowly, like a storm gathering in the distance. And now it was here, crashing down on me all at once. He had been plotting his escape for months, if not longer, and the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Victor wasn't just after money. He was after freedom, and I had been nothing more than an obstacle in his way. The realization hit me like a wave, but it didn't drown me. Instead, it ignited something deep within me. This wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the years I had wasted, the trust I had given to someone who never deserved it. I wasn't going to let him take everything without a fight. It was time to turn the tables. The hospital waiting room was quieter than ever, the minutes dragging by as I stared at my phone, my mind spinning with everything I had just uncovered. The reality of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. Victor had been lying to me for months, scheming behind my back, selling off our family's legacy like it was nothing. And I had been too blind. too trusting to see it. But now I saw clearly. And I was done being passive. I had spent too long letting Victor dictate the terms of our life together. Letting his coldness guide the decisions we made. As if I wasn't even there. That would stop now. I reached for the phone again. This time dialing Juliana's number, the private investigator I had hired in secret when I began to sense something wasn't right. Juliana had been discreet, careful, and I knew she had been working behind the scenes to uncover the truth about Victor's dealings. I had no more time to waste. It was time to get the full picture. Clara, I've been looking into him. Juliana's voice came through clearly, professional yet tinged with concern. Victor's been meeting with potential buyers. He's shown them documents that claim full ownership of your family estate. I'm sending you everything I have. I closed my eyes for a moment. The weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was theft. Plain and simple. He was trying to steal what was rightfully mine. What was rightfully my mother's. And he thought I wouldn't notice. Within seconds, I had the documents in front of me. Victor's forged papers. The fake contracts. The fraudulent transfer of ownership. He had planned it all so perfectly. So seamlessly. It was almost as if he had anticipated everything. But he had underestimated one thing. Me. Juliana, I said, my voice steady. We need to move fast. He's made his move, but now it's time to make mine. I could hear the faint smile in Juliana's voice as she replied. You're not alone in this. Clara, we'll get him. The adrenaline surged through me. But beneath it was something else, something colder, sharper. This was no longer just about recovering the estate. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about taking back what was mine. As the evening light began to fade, I sat in the hospital's quiet waiting room. My thoughts focused entirely on the next steps. My mother was still in surgery. And I had no idea what the outcome would be. But I couldn't afford to waste another second. I had to be ready. Victor thought he was in control. He thought he could walk away with everything he wanted. But he had no idea what was coming for him. Every detail I gathered, every piece of evidence Juliana sent me, began to fall into place. The truth was coming to light. And I was about to use it to bring Victor to his knees. This wasn't just about a house. It was about respect. It was about justice. I took a deep breath. The familiar scent of the hospital's antiseptic air filling my lungs. Soon, I would have everything I needed to make sure Victor couldn't escape. No matter how far he ran. This was just the beginning of what was to come. And I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. The weight of everything I had learned settled heavily on my shoulders as I sat there in the hospital. Staring at the glowing screen of my phone. My mother was still in surgery. And every minute felt like an eternity. But I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Victor's betrayal had dragged on long enough. I was done being the passive one in this marriage. Done being the one who waited for him to make the first move. It was time to confront him. Time to make him see the consequences of his actions. I pulled up the contact information for Mr. Reynolds. The potential buyer Victor had lined up for the estate. The name sent a chill through me. Knowing that my entire family's legacy was about to be sold to someone who had no idea what he was really buying. The phone rang, each second feeling like an eternity. And then Mr. Reynolds answered. His voice was polished, pleasant, but beneath it I could hear a faint hint of confusion. Hello, this is Mr. Reynolds. How can I help you? I inhaled deeply, gathering my strength, before speaking in a voice that was calm. Controlled, more so than I felt. Mr. Reynolds, this is Clara Mitchell. I understand you've been in contact with my husband about purchasing my family's estate. There was a brief pause on the other end. And then Mr. Reynolds' voice took on a more cautious tone. Ah, yes. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband mentioned you'd be calling. We're finalizing the deal. The paperwork is all set. A very generous offer, I must say. I'm looking forward to the investment opportunity. My pulse quickened as I steadied myself. Mr. Reynolds, I need to make something very clear. You've been misinformed. My husband does not have the legal authority to sell the estate. In fact, he's been showing you forged documents. There was silence on the other end of the line. And then Mr. Reynolds stumbled over his words. What? Forged documents? I don't understand. Let me explain. I continued, My voice unwavering. The property is held in an irrevocable trust. And Victor has no right to sell it without proper documentation from the trust administrator. Any sale that's been made is fraudulent. I suggest you check the paperwork. Mr. Reynolds, you may want to contact your legal team. I let the words hang in the air, knowing full well how they would land. A long pause followed, and then Mr. Reynolds' voice trembled slightly. I had no idea. This is serious. It is, I said coldly, and you'll want to stop the transfer of funds immediately. If you don't, you'll find yourself complicit in a real estate fraud scheme. I hung up before he could respond, the words still echoing in my mind. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Victor had been playing everyone. But now the truth was out. And there was no going back. But as I stood there in the sterile hallway, I knew this was just the beginning. My confrontation with Mr. Reynolds had only been the first step. There was still Victor to deal with. And I had no intention of letting him slip away unscathed. I pulled up the last message I had received from Victor. The one where he smugly declared that he had secured the sale and was on his way to Brazil with his mistress, Angela. He had no idea what I was about to do. I dialed Juliana's number, my fingers tight around the phone. It's time. Get everything in place. I want him to know the truth. And I want it to be on his terms. Let's bring him down. As I hung up the phone, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. Victor had thought he had it all figured out. That he could walk away with the money and leave me with nothing. But he was wrong. The tables were turning, and he would never see it coming. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. The nurses moving swiftly, as they always did. But this time, I wasn't the one waiting. I wasn't the one being left behind. It was time for Victor to face the consequences of his choices. And I would be there, standing strong, every step of the way. The waiting room felt colder than ever as I sat there, the minutes stretching on endlessly. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. Juliana's name flashed on the screen, and my heart raced. I picked up immediately. Clara, it's happening. Juliana's voice was steady, but there was an edge of excitement I couldn't ignore. Victor is about to find out what it feels like when the walls come crashing down. A surge of adrenaline rushed through me. As I leaned forward, barely able to contain the smile that crept onto my lips. The pieces were falling into place. Everything I had been planning, everything I had been preparing for, was finally coming to fruition. Victor was going to pay for what he'd done. Juliana, what's the status? I asked, my voice now a whisper, tight with anticipation. He's at the airport, heading to Brazil with Angela, she replied, her tone calm but sharp. But that's not all. I've got the security feeds, everything is in motion. The trust administrator, Mr. Harrison, is on standby. And the FBI is ready. It's time. I let out a slow breath. The tension that had been building inside me for days now shifting into something more powerful. It wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about every lie, every betrayal, every small moment where Victor thought he had won. This was it. This was the reckoning. I could almost picture Victor, smug, self-assured, thinking that the world was his for the taking, that he could walk away unscathed. But he had underestimated me. Underestimated everything that I was willing to do to protect what was mine. Keep me posted. I'm watching, I said, my voice filled with a quiet intensity. I sat back in my chair, glancing around the sterile hospital room, my mind replaying every word, every action that had led to this moment. Victor had no idea that he was already walking straight into his own trap. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was Juliana, her voice urgent now. Clara, we've got him. They're closing in. I could hardly contain the satisfaction that bubbled up inside me. It was happening. Victor's world was crumbling before him. And I wasn't about to miss a second of it. The sound of footsteps approaching the ICU caught my attention. And my gaze shot toward the door. The nurse stepped in, giving me a brief nod. Mrs. Mitchell, your mother's surgery went well. She's stable, but we'll need to monitor her for the next few hours. Relief flooded through me, but it was fleeting, as important as my mother's recovery was. This moment, this victory, was too significant to ignore. I hadn't come this far just to watch Victor slip away. No, I was going to make sure he felt every ounce of the destruction he had brought upon us. Another buzz. Another message from Juliana. We've got everything. The paperwork, the trust documents, and the fraud charges. Victor's been exposed. He's been arrested. They're holding him at the airport. The news hit me like a jolt of electricity. The weight of it all. The satisfaction. The justice. All came rushing forward. It was over. I stood up. My legs unsteady. But my heart felt light. For the first time in so long. I could breathe. Victor had thought he could outsmart me. He thought he had already won. But he hadn't accounted for me fighting back. He hadn't accounted for my family's legacy. For everything we had fought to protect. And now, he was going to pay the price. I turned away from the ICU door. My mind racing with everything that had just transpired. There was still more to be done. But for now, I had the peace I needed. I had reclaimed what was mine. And no one, not even Victor, could take that away from me. The phone buzzed again. And this time, it was a call from Agent Martinez. Her voice crackling through the speaker. Clara, we've found something even bigger. She said, a note of grim satisfaction in her tone. Victor's fraud runs deeper than we thought. This isn't just about your estate. He's been involved in multiple schemes, dozens of families targeted. We've got him cold. I closed my eyes for a moment. The weight of her words settling in. Victor had been running his scam for years. Hurting people, destroying lives, all for his own gain. But now, it was over. The hospital room seemed quieter now. The sterile walls no longer feeling so suffocating. It was done. Justice had been served. And though the road ahead would still be long, I had won. I had protected my mother's legacy. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I looked at the clock, noticing how much time had passed. My mother would be waking up soon. And when she did, she would find that everything we had fought for was still intact. We had won. And nothing, not even Victor, could ever change that. As I stood in the quiet hospital room, my mother's peaceful breathing the only sound filling the space, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The storm had passed. The battle was won. And the weight of everything that had transpired over the past few weeks felt like it was finally lifting. Victor had been arrested. His lies, his schemes, everything he had done to tear apart our family, had unraveled. The estate was safe. My mother's legacy protected. And yet, the victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined it would be. There was no sense of triumph in watching Victor fall from grace. No satisfaction in knowing that his greed had caught up with him. Instead, I felt a quiet peace. A calm that had been missing for far too long. For the first time in what felt like years, I was in control, not just of the estate, but of my own life. I glanced at my mother. Still unconscious but stable, the weight of her own struggles reflected in her peaceful expression. She had fought so hard to keep the family together, to protect what mattered most. And now, it was my turn to do the same. I took a seat beside her bed, my hand resting gently on hers, the warmth of her skin grounding me in this moment of calm. Everything that had happened, every moment of pain and betrayal, had led me here, to this place of healing, to this place of strength. And as I sat there, I realized something profound. This was never just about the house. It was never about the money or the revenge. It was about protecting what truly mattered. It was about family. It was about legacy. And in the end, that was something no one could take from us. The door to the room opened quietly, and Agent Martinez stepped in. Her expression calm but determined. She gave me a nod, acknowledging the victory, but there was no hint of celebration in her eyes. She was a professional, always focused on the job, but I could see in her face that she understood what this moment meant for me. You did it, Clara, she said, her voice steady. We've got everything we need. Victor's going down for this, along with his accomplice. Angela, the evidence is overwhelming, and it's not just your family he targeted. There are dozens of others. They'll all get justice because of what you did. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. What Victor had done wasn't just an isolated betrayal. It was a pattern, a trail of destruction left behind by a man who believed he could manipulate and exploit his way to the top. But no more. Thank you, Agent Martinez, I said softly. For everything. She gave me a small smile. A brief flicker of warmth in her otherwise professional demeanor. It was my pleasure. But you did all the hard work. You're stronger than you realize. I looked back at my mother. Her chest rising and falling with each steady breath. This moment, this peace, was everything. And it wasn't just the end of Victor's reign of terror. It was the beginning of something new. A new chapter for me. For my mother. For our family. The house would remain in our hands. The estate safe. And the legacy my father had built would continue. But more than that, I had reclaimed my life. I had taken back my power. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be obstacles to face. Battles to fight. But for now, I could rest. For now, I could savor the quiet. The calm. And the knowledge that no matter what, the Mitchell legacy was still intact, and it always would be. I looked at my mother again, smiling softly. It was over, and in the end, I had won. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping tales of family, betrayal, and triumph, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to me. And by subscribing, you'll never miss a moment of these powerful journeys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.